Hi, my name is Nick Van Weerdenburg. I'm the founder and CEO of Rangle.io. We're a Toronto-based digital transformation consultancy, and we work with different clients building modern web applications. And with me today is Brett Durrett, the former CEO of IMVU, a venture capitalist, and I'll let you do the full introduction.
So most recently, as far as my operating role, was the CEO of IMVU, which people don't know that well as a company, but they actually know better as the original lean startup. It was co-founded by Ries, and so I joined as about employee 6, and was really through the transformation of the company and sort of pioneering a bunch of development processes, everything from continuous deployment to operating in a lean product development type of way. Before that, I'd started a couple of companies and joined a couple of companies that were all small, and have both had some success and some failures in building companies, and kind of learned from each step along the way.
So Rangle started 5 years ago, and that was right when lean startup was really ascending in the market, and there was a lot of discussions about it. Agile was starting to come mainstream. So one of the unique things about Rangle is that all of our clients, when we told them we were an Agile only shop and that we worked in an iterative manner, they actually were good with that. So we managed to build a business around Agile, around continuous delivery type processes with our clients, and a lot of that came with Lean Startup and the Agile movement. I'm just really curious about how did that all begin and what that journey was like.
Right. So it's interesting. Most people came to Lean Startup sort of after the book was published, and some people were looking at some of the conferences and like early speaking that Ries was doing about it. And by the time that people saw it, it was actually looked like a well thought out process with a lot of structure around it. But a lot of the things that we actually started doing, including the process, was simply a scrambling, trying to figure out the best way to deliver customer value.
Well, that's really that's fascinating, because we had a similar experience, and we were building teams, but everyone was coming in and trying to figure out the what of what they should be doing, and the sort of the cargo cult sort of mentality, or people thinking they understood or they didn't understand, what Agile was. And as we were scaling and trying to get teams functioning effectively, it was really difficult until at one point we just sort of stopped talking about Agile, and we just had everyone focus on continuous delivery. And that seemed to create a different mindset of problem solving and getting stuff out the door, and people all of a sudden felt like, well, I got to deliver, so let me figure out how to do that, and let me work with the team to do that, as opposed to am I doing enough points of work, or am I doing the stand-ups right, or the theory versus the mindset, and continuous delivery became foundational, and we really scaled around that as a concept, and tacked Agile on top of that, because we found that I guess DevOps mindset is really a popular term now. That was the core that allowed us to scale our Agile practice and our lean practice.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting where you'll see a lot of companies that will grab onto something like Agile or any other process or methodology, and they sometimes lose focus on the fact that it's not actually about that process, that it's about delivering the customer value, and that you need to be flexible in figuring out the best paths to doing that. And so IMVU being a great example is, we discovered these processes along the way, realizing that there was another way to deliver this customer value, and if we change the way we do that. And so while IMVU always had somewhat of a Scrum-like Agile structure, it was incredibly loosely executed in every single group, and we empowered every customer or every product group to figure out the best way to deliver their software to their customer. And so everyone would have kind of a different thing, and then we'd share this worked, this didn't work, and try to spread that across the company. But being a company that's excellent at a process but not excellent at solving a customer problem, it doesn't last very long.
One of the interesting aspects of what we saw is when we started working on bigger projects, as you get into larger teams or more complex markets or existing product lines, that there was more fear of making a misstep, and a more of a planning function that would go into the delivery function, and the lean sort of principles and the continuous delivery model would start to struggle, because the feedback loops and being able to reach deeper into a large organization would be a challenge. And I think a lot of companies find this today with digital transformations and being more digital, and being they're not naturally digital. With your company, with it scaling up and your work in the industry, what are your thoughts on applying these principles and to the buzzword of the day, digital transformation?
I feel like with a lot of companies, the larger companies, they hear about something and they have to put a check mark next to like, we're doing this now. So Agile becomes a thing, and you hear that all the innovative companies are doing Agile. So someone needs to check the box that we now have Agile projects going on. And a lot less of throughout the company, it being part of the culture and saying we're actually changing the way that we work. And it's very difficult when you have larger companies that you can't just take a process and say, we're changing the way we work without actually changing the culture and having the mindset. And so if you don't have people embracing like in a lean type of way that you're going to have this iterative process and these quick releases, and that you really do want to get the validated feedback, and there's going to be less predictability about specific dates and outcomes because you're waiting for the customer feedback, it's just not going to be successful the first time you run into another part of the organization that's like, we need exact predictions for this quarter. And a lot of times that the rewards and incentives in an organization like that are about not making a mistake rather than missing the biggest opportunity of your life. It's safer, no one gets fired for missing the opportunity, they get fired for making a bad choice. And those types of like cultural things reinforce sort of do what you've been doing, be completely predictable, even if predictable is mediocre.
Right. So embracing the uncertainty and the learning to really find the right solution and really provide the end user what the end user is validating.
Right, and so it's the process by which you develop the software, but it's also like, how do you reward and recognize employees, and like what types of behaviors are you trying to make sure that everyone has when they come into the company. If you've been doing the same thing for the same way for 20 to 30 years, a lot of the times like the way that your company acknowledges and like incentivizes things are built in to be against the system of change.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I've noticed is that even in Rangle, as we do things for a long time and we get really good at it, it becomes sort of just implicitly formalized because it's the way that things are done, and change can sometimes be difficult. So what we've really focused on, as we've evolved and we've introduced new things or new ways of working, is ultimately the team's got to focus on the goal so that they can, they don't feel like they're compromising the process because if the goal's not clear. So with larger teams, that customer focus or that outcome focus becomes critical. Otherwise, it becomes about just the work itself, not about the outcomes. What were your experiences in changing culture over time as you scaled up?
My experience is that it's hard. Cultures have, like, once they start kind of rolling in a particular direction, they have a tendency to kind of reinforce themselves as they go along. And so you actually need to take active steps to, you either direct the culture in the way that you want, or recognize that like you are going to have a culture that forms and that you're going to have to like run your organization kind of consistent like with that. Early on at IMVU, there's, some things were really reinforced. When continuous deployment came out and we were doing this method of software development, we could not hire engineers that were comfortable doing it. So people would come into a company and they realized that at previous companies, when you broke the production cluster, or like if you pushed out software that had bugs in it, someone was going to yell at you. And so what we did is we said, like, we have to change this like immediately. It's so critical for everyone working here. So we had engineers, when they started on day one, would push code out to the production cluster. And if it took someone 2 days, that would be kind of a big red flag. And then if it was 3 days, we'd be like, this probably isn't going to work, because we needed to, on day one, have people believe that I'm going to be able to do this thing. I can operate in an environment of safety. And even if something happens, like, so when someone did actually take out our production cluster, we would celebrate. And we'd like send a big congratulations email out to the company saying, hey, new person started, pushed out code, cluster broke. And the reason that was worth celebrating is because we were building a cluster that was supposed to be resilient against something like that and catch it. And so they helped us identify something that shouldn't have been possible. Mm-hmm. Those little things kind of like set like sort of the trend going forward. And that you constantly have to like look for those, like how do you, again, reward employees, like who gets promoted, like what are the behaviors that you encourage?
That's one of the hardest problems. And one of the interesting things in lean manufacturing is trial and error is generally a bad idea. Like that continuous improvement needs to happen against a stable system. So with a small company, you can get that mindset, you can have that process, you can have everyone on the same page. With a larger company moving towards in a digital transformation, trying to sort of work in the same way in a lean startup manner to find the right solution to the right problem in their market, that's a difficult change. So we've seen a lot of digital factories, we've seen partnerships, we've seen a lot of different approaches. What are your thoughts on, and I know that you've worked in smaller, like not in the enterprise space, but what are some of your thoughts on what large companies can do to sort of create this kind of cultural change and becoming more digital?
Yeah, well, I think one of the big things I don't have a whole lot of direct experience. I do talk to a lot of people that actually do work with enterprise clients, and I hear a lot of frustration from people that come from like sort of lean agile environments. And the frustration is it feels like you've got a small part of the organization that is participating in this or like will embrace it and maybe has an idea, but ultimately like it's meeting resistance at every step along the way. And when I look at a lot of the like large companies, I was looking at the companies now that are like the top 5 most valuable companies as of 2016. And the only one that was on in the year 2000 was Microsoft. And all the other companies were below that, and many of the companies basically didn't exist. And when you look at the companies, they're very innovative companies. Google, is innovative, does a lot of experiments, tries a lot of things. Amazon is a company that I think is constantly like looking for like the new opportunity and new ways of doing things and new offerings and stuff. Going into cloud was just, I think, kind of a amazingly insightful like thing to do. And they end up with, I think these are companies that end up with sort of at their heart and soul are really about the change, the innovation, about a really kind of like what is going to be a breakthrough opportunity, and not about the protection of exactly what they have today. And
Right.
I don't know what the right answer is, but I think it has to be for companies that really want to make this transition. It's going to require sort of a top-down, massive cultural change of saying we have to be different than the way that we were before, and push that throughout the organization. And that's a big, massily disruptive change for a corporation. You're turning around basically aircraft carriers. It's a lot of work, and so I don't see a lot of people go after it because I think it's a messy business. But I think that's ultimately what's necessary. Otherwise, I think what ends up happening is you have what I continue to hear, which is big company wants to do this, needs to work with sort of an external company that actually is innovative and fast-paced and adaptive to new technologies and such to build the product. And that helps them a lot, but it doesn't give them as much value as they could if they would actually sort of start embracing sort of the way that company works as well.
Right. Yeah, so one of the things that I found in the last 5 years is when you work in a continuous delivery model, if you are able to get to continuous delivery, and even if it's not to production, but if you're continuously able to deliver value, it means that you have the alignment, the clarity of goals, the right team, and the right enablers. And as soon as that starts to falter, when you can't deliver, when things get blocked, when you can't go to production, when compliance won't give approval, those things are sort of all surfacing of those blockers and those cultural issues. So in almost every case where I found where we can get to continuous delivery and we can get the cycle time down, from having an idea to getting it into production and get that shrunk far enough, it's not that the continuous delivery has created that mindset, but it's reflecting that mindset's there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. It does change the way you think about things and the way you think about possibilities. And early on when I used to talk about continuous delivery, first it was met with the like, this isn't going to work type of mindset. And then later it was like, okay, well maybe this will work, but why would you want to do that? And it was amazing once you broke down all the barriers of like, yeah, we can do that. And in some cases, like, when you look at security fixes for a company, when we started this, like you'd have a security patch and be like a 6-week process to basically, get out what would be an emergency security patch if you found a vulnerability. And you're like, no, we can get this out in the next hour or two.
Right.
But more importantly, like we had occasionally like things that would come up that'd be like business opportunities that would be like, hey, there's a promotional deal we can work with another company, and no one could actually deliver on it because if nothing else, their release cycle was so long that like anyone that wanted to build out what they needed. So they'd be like, hey, another deal fell through, like they're not going to deliver in time for our release, from the external company. And, but it's, we only have a week to get this out. And I'm like, yeah, we can absolutely get that promotion out for you. Like, we don't have to worry about a release cycle. The release cycle is 15 minutes from now. So like it starts making you realize that you can react to things so quickly, and that includes customer feedback, rather than saying like, oh, we're going to have to go down this path for 5-6 months on potentially the wrong path. You say, oh, very quickly we found out that we made a mistake here.
So if a company is really focused on delivering value and working in a lean agile fashion, if they can sort of accomplish certain metrics, like if they can problem solve to getting to that, so we're talking top down culture change, but how do you know the culture change is taking? And software development is complex, lots of like relationships, but if there's the top down goal and the continuous improvement towards those kind of time metrics, would be a good sort of measure of whether progress is being made.
Well, I think each company, aside from saying like, whenever someone says we want to be agile or we want to be innovative or whatever, I mean, I think one of the key things is like, well, what does that objectively mean? Right. And I think that's also where things go bad, because if people don't actually have an objective way to assess like whether they're on the right track or not, then you just have a bunch of like money being spent towards a initiative that actually doesn't have a clear goal. Right. So, for each company, I think if you're saying like, hey, like look, we need to be a more innovative company. It's like, well, first, why? Like, what is it? What is it about that makes you think you need to be innovative? And then like, what is going to be the thing that tells you that you're actually doing that? Is it that you have more products coming out? Is it that you're actually releasing things that like you've never seen from, like that you literally are getting patents on because of the first implementation of it? However you want to define it, but like you need to figure out some way to set the goalpost for people knowing that they're moving in the right direction. And then all the continuous improvement, literally everything you try, if people are like free to basically find the best path to that, they'll at least know whether they're going down, they're headed towards the right direction. Right.
So having a clear goal and having the measures if you're making progress to it.
Yeah. So the objective ones, like,
yeah.
Because I don't know what it means. When someone says we're an agile organization, I'm like, okay. Like you practice agile, I'm sure you can measure that, but like what is the, as a business, what is your real goal though? Like
right.
It's ultimately, everyone's goal is to, solve a customer problem or to make their customer successful.
Yeah.
So, how is your business or whatever initiatives you're doing actually delivering on that goal?
Right. So starting with the value that the business is delivering. So what's the output? Like what is the actual ultimate business value, and then working back from that. Right. So not agile as in we're working iteratively, but how are we validating and learning and delivering against the goals?
Yeah. And I think, it's funny, the thing I joke about most often right now is blockchain. Because the number of companies I encounter or hear about saying like, we're going to be adding blockchain. It's really like Starbucks with pumpkin spice. I mean, they're trying to put blockchain in everything. And the number of conversations I've had with people where they were able to explain why they were doing blockchain in a sort of a manner that actually made sense is a very small percent of the companies that are starting like, we're really looking to embrace blockchain. And so it's kind of like one of these interesting things where I feel like there's someone that's going like, this blockchain is hot, we've got to be involved in it, and people are being put against the process of like, let's be blockchain, but no one actually understands really what the clear goal is other than to check off the box that we're blockchain. Mm-hmm. And so you can apply that to like a lot of things that are the hot, we've got to be, or other people are doing this. But if you don't know why you're doing it, if you don't know what the objective outcome is, then you're probably just going to, again, burn a lot of money to basically be able to say, hey, we're blockchain.
Right, and I heard you say something yesterday that resonated with me, and that while you're pursuing that, you're going to have a confirmation bias kick in when you see any kind of small signal that shows that you're being successful, but unless you've really anchored with what is success and what are you really trying to do, then you're just going to go down the wrong path.
Yeah, we're humans are interesting machines, and looking at the indicators that telling you where you're on the right path, particularly after you've poured a tremendous amount of effort and time and built something, we want to see the thing that validates that we did the right thing. So, again, trying to be as objective as possible about things, is the thing that really will tell you like whether you're on the right path, and holding to the standards that you set at the beginning of a project rather than like moving the goalpost at the end. So.
Right. There was a conference here last year, the Elevate conference, and we were a founding partner in it, and we were running a track, and was really keen on, obviously, Agile as a company. We're keen on modern tech stacks. We're keen on lean startup. But with the amount of companies coming to it, and there'd be a lot of large companies coming to it, we ended up going with the term lean innovation. So to really, being able to talk to any company of any size, like how do you apply lean agile principles to innovation, and what does that mean? Stepping back, and how do you create innovation? And it's an interesting question that we still see with all the different clients we work with. We've worked with about 200 different clients, all in an agile sort of fashion, but all were different experiences, because the reason we were working for them and the goal they were sort of trying to address was different. So then, really thinking about what is innovation and how do companies innovate, it's what a lot of them are struggling with. And when you innovate, first off, you need to have an idea. There's the ideation, sort of, you have a concept, something that you think will add value. Maybe it's a feature request from a client or something, but then you have the validation. Is it real, and do you deliver it? A lot of companies struggle with the front end of that process, because where is the idea coming from? What's the creative process? What's the strategy process, the design process, prioritizing business goals. And then once they have one, now they want to validate it, but often they don't know how to validate it, right? So because they look for, okay, let's apply a lean startup principle, we launch it, we look at some metrics, the metrics aren't great, do you pivot, do you drop it? It's a long-winded way of framing up a question, though. From your experience in sort of innovating and taking new ideas to market, that whole life cycle, it's long and complicated and messy. You're dealing with business, you're dealing with their planning, and then you're going through to design, and then you're going to building and validating. You said something once to me, A/B testing is not a substitute for design. But yeah, so just the broader lean startup, lean innovation, the concept of innovation from a broader life cycle.
Yeah, it's when you look at like all the requirements and such, that the fact finding and everything that can go into a project, it's interesting to think about the amount of forethought that goes into a lot of things. And in some cases, there's particularly with like established businesses, there's a lot of information that you can get that's actually very reliable, predictable businesses that are mature and such like that. And those are absolutely things to sort of take in and consider in like how you sort of design things. But there's a lot of times where it feels like, in some cases, like actually getting the work done and actually saying, let's build an iteration of something and test it is actually a faster process than all of the forethought and the planning and the work. And it's like, in all of this like pre-work that we did to kind of like get something that we can test, like, did we have something that we could have actually built with the same amount of effort and actually have tested it rather than even thought about testing it? So one thing that's kind of interesting is just simply, where are you spending all your resources to do something, and is there ways to like always like shave that down and get like a faster test, or like get some like early indicators and such. So we moved as we started moving at IMVU. We found that like as we would like release features and stuff, having a stronger design influence and like running through a lot more of sort of screenshot, early on screenshots and stuff, and then having like templates that we like walk people through, was a way more efficient way and better use of time to like basically do 20 iterations of that before you put it in the client, because the client took a little bit longer to work on it. So it was constantly just like, well, what's the faster way to get this in front of a customer, or to get the validation on it? Mm-hmm. And then again, so I think you asked about the, at the end of like knowing whether or not like, do you pivot or do you persevere? Those are, like the pivot or persevere thing is always actually a very challenging one, because and I see a lot of companies pivot very quickly. They say that didn't work, so I'm going to pivot. And usually I think of that as like not having a strong sort of vision for what you're trying to build. And one of our products was one where that had a very strong vision for where it was going. And the first release was like okay. The second release was kind of okay. Like it was all kind of trending in basically the direction, but it wasn't overwhelming. And it was one of these things where I think earlier at the company we would have said like, oh, we're not seeing like the big spike result. But that ultimately became the product that is driving all of the growth in the company at this point. And it was one that was like we understood where it needed to go. And it was kind of the perseverance because we knew that it hadn't delivered on the full vision yet, and we kind of keep going. Mm-hmm. So the earlier results were just simply like, hey, it's doing what we thought it should be doing based on where it is, even though that's not great at this point. Mm-hmm. The needle that we wanted to move, we were able to prove that we could move it each time.
Right. So that in a bigger company, when they're working on something, looking for innovation, that vision becomes important. Mm-hmm. Having someone who can sort of hold that vision and make the call on a persevere or pivot.
Absolutely, and I think I hate to be kind of biased here, but I don't. For a lot of the companies that are trying to do like this digital transformation or make this move, not a lot of like real visionary things come to mind. Mm-hmm. I find that a lot of companies seem to be like, well, we need to move our sort of existing business over into like a digital format or offer like the digital tools these days. But I don't think it's taking a mindset of like, let's start with a clean slate and like reimagine things and what are all the tools that are out there to build something new, and then how would we re-envision our product today? It's kind of like, well, take the old, move it to digital, or hey, our competitor did this, so we need to put that feature in too. Mm-hmm. And I think it's why like one of the things that kind of strikes me is banking is one where I've looked at and have said that a lot of my banking apps have been kind of like, there's like nothing in here. And the things that you see things like a Venmo or something like that, and I'm like, wow, this is actually solving a problem and it's innovative. And it's a couple of people that were like, this is a better way to like do payments, or they had a vision for payments, and that's where like the real innovation comes out. And those companies eventually get purchased by the big companies. So I think Venmo got purchased by PayPal and stuff. Yeah. But when you think about like a Venmo, like there's no reason that PayPal should not have completely owned that business with an innovative group like that had the freedom to explore and like build out these concepts and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And so, I guess it's just always surprising to me because, I guess it's the Christensen thing, the innovator's dilemma is, it doesn't seem that interesting at the time until, oh my God, it became very interesting and like it's a threat to us. Right. So, so I guess that's a kind of a long-winded answer there.
Yeah. It seems to me in the digital transformation space and agile transformation over the last 5 years, the early adopters were very, let's do agile, and they just tried to do it without really having the nuanced understanding of it and the sense of mindset and goals. So what I see happening in our clients today is a lot more, in a way, profound. There's a lot more talk about mindset. I find in the DevOps space, there's as much talk now about DevOps mindset as sort of DevOps technology, which is really exciting. And then a shift towards customer journeys. And so there's been a lot of, in terms of strategy, instead of strategy being sort of at the high business level where you digitize your channels, if you get down to, what's the customer journey and what are we doing at this stage of the customer journey? And at that point, start to try to drive innovation, because now you've created a focus. So it's not just like a whole bunch of different ideas. So two of our larger clients are doing really amazing work in that space, where they've identified a space in the customer journey. They're running through the ideation process and then trying to carry that through to the market and sort of learn from it. And so there's that space for creativity and innovation and vision, where you can have a vision owner there. The challenge that starts surfacing though is the rest of the organization, so that they've got these amazing innovation processes in place and they've got teams to do it, but it's change management through all of the sort of other business processes. So they've gotten to a very agile, innovation-centric mindset, and now they've got to get the rest of the organization in support of that.
Yeah, and I wish them the best of luck with that. Again, this is when you have like a very innovative group, I think it's that group almost always has to at some point interact with a company that has a different type of mindset and such, and every time that you hit up against that, it's a barrier. Like you have to adjust, and so there's. I don't think it's a completely fruitless task, but I mean, I think it requires a lot of effort for someone to work within an organization, and how do you kind of push change throughout that organization? And so instead of it just I think it requires like leaders that are not only sort of the agile organization or the innovative organization. It requires leaders that are not only about building the product, but they're leaders that understand how to make other parts of their organization that are not agile or not innovative be successful, and also feel trust and feel safe, and figure out like what are the incentives for them that give them like these like little areas of like, hey, like I can build something, or I can help you be successful at your job. Like let's work towards like getting the trust and kind of have that start spreading. But it's a lot of work, and it's a lot of work that for a lot of people, you want to be like, I just want to build a great product. I don't want to have to deal with the fact that I'm trying to change an organization that I'm loosely connected to, but is blocking me in various ways. So that's again, it's why I keep saying like I feel like for these organizations, if you really want to have the innovation, you're going to have it become like the top leadership of the company and say, we are absolutely going to change things, and and deal with that, deal with the hard parts of actually changing an organization.
I saw an interesting agile transformation framework or digital transformation framework that I quite liked, because it seemed to capture some of the foundational stuff, and it started off with the sort of the commitment to the digital journey. So you have like a chief digital officer, like at the very senior level, that you have this buy-in that you're going through this digital journey, and it's going to be like a profound one. Like it's your business. It's going to be a core part of your business. And the second goal was to really put in place the technology foundation, because a lot of legacy technology and the processes stops companies from being able to even dream of getting anything in production for 18 months. And I think that's starting to trigger a lot of the move to the cloud, is coming from that sort of technology enablement to re-envision sort of the technology processes. After the technology's in place, then the third tenet was getting the talent and the team in place, so the people who can support and do the work. And then the fourth was agile. So agile came last, which I thought was interesting, because usually the way that companies were going about this 5 years ago was like, okay, let's bring in agile, and then all the rest of the magic would happen.
So yeah, that sounds like a great approach, because if you're starting, or at least an approach that's going to be more successful than starting with a process but not having a culture that supports it. So if you start building the organization around the tooling and the people and bringing them in and with a mindset that is about wanting to like make this transformation and does want to adopt sort of some of the best development practices, I think it's going to be much more successful than giving people that aren't in that mindset a tool and saying, use this tool, when really what's more than likely is they're going to apply that tool in the wrong way. And so when you talk about agile, I think one of the common sort of challenges with like bigger organizations that start moving towards an agile is they adopt this sort of like Scrum release cycle, but actually what they're doing is they have a year's worth of features that they're building up, but they're only doing these incremental releases. And sort of my test when I talk to a company is, between scrums, when you do a release, like how much customer insight are you getting, and how much contact are you having with customers to guide the next step? And if the answer is like none, then it tells me, it's like, okay, well you're not. Whatever version of agile you're practicing is kind of a break from the aspect of like it's built around that your things are going to be changing, and you want to have a smoother path for doing this change and making your product like react to actually the customer usage, versus a long waterfall like schedule. So absolutely, if you can start with the culture first, that seems like a better approach.
One thing that you brought up a little earlier, and it was one of the for me when I read Lean Startup, was the concept of vanity metrics versus actually good metrics. And I guess part of the challenge with metrics is finding the right ones. But it seems to me that if you can't identify those metrics and you can't identify your goals, then you have no way to know if you're moving in the right direction. Do you see more of an application of metrics to agile transformation or digital transformation? I mean, what are your thoughts in general on metrics and this space?
Well, I mean, I love metrics for validating what you're doing. I mean, I think they come back and they tell you you're on the right path or not. Mm-hmm. So I think the best combination is sort of a strong vision. And a strong vision is good, unless you're following a cult leader, in which case a strong vision could be bad for people. And so the strong vision tells you where you want to go, and the metrics are the way of saying yeah, you're actually on the right path there, as opposed to you're kidding yourself that you're actually getting there. The vanity metrics are just simply metrics that are usually things that are sniped that well, your company you can't actually control that metric, or it's a side effect of something else. You're not showing that what you're building is actually doing that and influencing that. And so there's a lot of times when you read Silicon Valley Press and stuff like that, it's always suspicious when a company has made up a new metric, numbers of users that eat cheese while watching this has gone up 75% or something, and you're like, well, if you're a cheese company, that's great. But otherwise, it's kind of where did you weirdly pick this business metric that's a confluence of a bunch of other things? Mm-hmm. And it's probably because the actual metrics that are important to your business weren't that interesting. So you're sharing this thing that when you put it together in a weird statement, actually seems like you're doing something. But for I think I'm fairly simple on the everything derives to me from ultimately the things that are important to your business. For most businesses, you've got either some form of growth. In Silicon Valley, user growth is something can be an acceptable form of growth without revenue. In most places in the world, or in later, revenue growth becomes critically important. In most places in the world, and on non-VC backed companies, revenue and profit becomes critically important. And so when you look at that, I think it's easy to look and say, you can look at your bank statement, and that's a great metric to tell you kind of part of that. But then you go down and the next level deep, and it's well, what drives that? And it's usually how many people pay us, how much they're paying us, how much each customer pays, the number of customers they're paying us, how long they stay customers. And from those, the metrics flow. And so that if you just kind of follow it down from what is the most important thing to your business, there's a bunch of metrics that just really obviously flow out of that. So that ties, the acquisition funnels and stuff come directly out of well, that's where do we get our customers from?
Right.
So, and then eventually when you get down to product level features, it gets down to the nuances, which is hey, we need people, people have to invite a friend, or people have to message, or we want people to update their account credentials, which allows us to send them a new form of upsell and something like that. Those are I think project level metrics that are usually less critical for a company. And if you're looking at the top level, you're probably in the weeds for what's actually making a difference.
Right. So from a metric perspective, finding the right core metrics to just make sure you're moving in the right direction and that you're paying attention to reality.
Yeah. So that's it. And yeah, for me, it's pretty simple. Again, your bank account is pretty much the best metric at the end of the day. If you're realizing that that's going down every month, and you're not in a company who's all about sort of growth of user base and figuring out monetization later, which most companies are not. That's really the great equalizer. And when that gets to zero, you're done.
Right.
No.
So in terms of trends, so we've gone through a remarkable period, let's say in the last 10 years. So the rise of agile practices, lean startup, customer validation. In the technology space, there's been a real evolution in how we think about software development. A lot of things that used to be computer science have become sort of foundational in modern software development. Your ability to reason about code, test code, verifiability, continuous delivery. There's just been so many things that have happened in the last 10 years. Is there anything that you see on the horizon that excites you in terms of what comes next?
I think the next wave of apps that'll come from the technologies that are sort of readily available off the shelf are just amazing in the sense that they empower very, very small groups of people and even individuals to build stuff. And so when I think about over the last 20 years in particular, it used to be 20 years ago, if you were building a website, like every piece of software along that stack, except for maybe your database, which you had to buy from Oracle for $100,000, like every piece of technology you had teams building. So it was take years for you to get just the foundation of Hello World out sort of as a product. And what we've watched is like all of these things like open source, transform that to like you can basically get your entire web stack so that it's off the shelf and running, and Hello World is now a 1 hour project to basically install the server and such. And that's now transformed to the like, well, you don't even have to have a server. I can spin this up, I can have an instance, I can have 100 instances, and there's so many services for doing all the things that used to be that you still had to roll custom. So IMVU had built the split testing system that allowed us to roll out feature flags, and it would also allow us to test all of our metrics against them. I was talking to a company a couple of months ago, and they're offering that as a service, and I'm like, wow, like I can't, the amount of person hours that went into us building this and debugging it, and like the maintenance was huge. That's just now available. So like day one, any company can like start off with this type of stuff. So now you're looking at like the various things, like the amount of like AI packages and technologies that like you can like that are probably going to be powering some like fundamental changes to software, and they're just accessible. Like you download this open source package, and then like all of a sudden you may not understand the details or the depths of like machine learning and artificial intelligence, but there's enough of a package to kind of get you started and actually build these things. And so I think it continues to push things down where like things that were only achievable by massive companies before will be pet projects, and like one or two people saying we're gonna build this out. And I think that's super exciting for me, because it allows innovation to happen at many more levels as a result.
So more just the rising level at which we operate and work based upon the packages and the technologies we can sort of just tap.
Yeah, just the foundation that you're starting from is just astounding of like what you can build out in a day. I mean, it's it's just an amazing starting base, and it's truly democratized. It's not out of reach of anyone. These aren't most of these packages. Most of these packages, particularly if you're just building a company or starting, have like entry level free for like your first X number of users or whatever, which is a huge opportunity for people. And so that means that you don't even have to be in like Silicon Valley to be like doing the startup and need a bunch of cash. As these things become cheaper and provide more power, it's conceivable that people that like have they're just very sharp and driven with less opportunity will have the ability to build something that is actually a really meaningfully game changer of a product.
Right. That's exciting. So
yeah,
the acceleration of innovation rather than the just going to the big companies.
Yeah, and accessibility. I mean, I love the fact that it doesn't have to be controlled by large companies or people with a lot of resources. As I talk to entrepreneurs all over, like I meet a lot of really bright people, and there's the reality is there's like areas that you can be located that are going to give you a lot more opportunity and be stronger, like give you advantages and stuff. And I think that's changing a little bit. I mean, they're still going to have like Toronto's a great place for building companies, and I see a lot of people coming here, and like I think a lot of investments to make sure that you're building up like a great community here for that. Silicon Valley obviously has like all sorts of advantages, from like access to money to people and such, like but it doesn't, you don't have to be there anymore, and you still have at least a chance, or you'll have access. So that's exciting to me.
What do you see happening in the global sort of software industry maybe 10 years out? Do you see the same requirement for software development? Do you see the landscape changing?
Wow, broad question. I think what's interesting to me, and this my answer might be a little bit more political than technological, but I look at in some cases like more and more some of the most innovative companies that drive the most growth not being from the United States. And when I look at like the people that were behind building some of the companies that are market leaders and have like really redefined markets or created markets, and how they came to be in the United States and everything, I see less opportunity for that going forward right now. And so I could see like in 10 years where we're looking out and saying like the U.S. is one of the companies where these where you see these companies being built, but maybe not the country where these are being built.
Right.
And like I said, like a little bit of a political commentary and such, but I'm a big fan of whenever you can find sort of amazing, great minds, talent, and you want to bring them into an ecosystem, and it's wherever you can find these people, you always want to be building the best teams, and I think that means being open to like the best team members can come from anywhere, and can come from almost any situation, and so I think that's one of the big changes I look at. And I think that one of the other things that's kind of interesting though to think about though is I don't think it's in 10 years, but like how software is created and the role of the software developer, and will there be breakthroughs in like how software is written, either through artificial intelligence or something else, that changes the role of the software developer. It's pretty interesting because I think software developers, as you've looked at how the workforces have changed and stuff, a lot of the workforces that have actually suffered as a result of software and automation and everything, the software developers, I think, felt like, okay, well, I benefit from this because I'm the one creating these systems that are optimizing work and requiring less workers, automating things. But it's possible that there could be a change in software where that also happens, where it's like, yeah, there's a different, like, you don't need that type of a skill set per se, or the bar for delivering is substantially lower.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of akin to the fact of how open source changed what level of skill you need to actually build out an application.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible that like this will be, you can imagine something where maybe like someone with the strong product design skills is actually capable of getting all the code created.
Right.
And that would dramatically shift the landscape as well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much. It's
Thank
been
you.
a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure being at Rangle. Like, you have an amazing team. Everyone's been truly Canadian. Everyone's been super nice and friendly. I've absolutely loved my stay here.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks.